So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Gott Eigerman, and I'm the Grants Program Manager at the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance. Welcome to Dam Busters. This is a collaboration between us, the Charles River Watershed Association, and the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration. This webinar series offers basic information about dam removal. It's not intended to advocate for the removal of any particular dam or dams. For this year's topics and exact schedule, please visit the Mass Rivers Alliance website at www.massriversalliance.org. And please mark your calendars for the next Dam Busters session, which will be on June 3rd, and it will be on sediment management. Today's webinar is about creative communications on dam removal, reconnecting rivers. A few quick housekeeping items. Number one, this session is scheduled to end at 1 p.m. Please put your questions in the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen, which staff is tracking, or hold them until the last 20 minutes of question and answer session. And three, note that these webinars are being recorded. Recordings and any other webinar materials will be made available on the Mass Rivers website. Thank you to those of you who've been completing the post-session surveys. We now have an incentive to offer you. It's your own Hydro Flask water bottle with a Mass Rivers logo on it. Quite special. So if you fill out the survey and include your name and address at the bottom, you'll have a chance to win this Hydro Flask water bottle. And we'll send out a survey link after today's webinar. So now I'm quite delighted to introduce our speakers today. Amber Siegel from the Charles River Watershed Association and Yari Walensky from Trillium Studios Film. Amber is the Senior Restoration Manager at Charles River Watershed Association, supporting environmental restoration, climate mitigation, and community engagement efforts. Amber has a creative, interdisciplinary background, having earned a BA in studio art from Kenyon College and an MA in environmental policy and urban planning from Tufts University. Her master's thesis focused on assessing the efficacy of public art as a tool for science communication. Amber is dedicated to utilizing creative and community-focused approaches to restoration work wherever and whenever possible. Yari Walensky is an award-winning director and editor at Trillium Studios Film. His work includes films and commercials for a wide range of clients and nonprofit organizations such as National Geographic, PBS, MIT, Service Titan, Viant, McLean Hospital, and Helping Hands Monkey Helpers. In 2021, Yari and his father, Kerry Walensky, created Turnaround Films, an ongoing series about the people who are working to solve the climate and environmental problems we face. So thank you very much. I turn it over to Amber and Yari.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We're super excited to share this short documentary film with you on the dam removal movement in our watershed and across the country with a specific focus on Indigenous perspectives. I'm particularly enthusiastic about the use of arts as a communication tool for scientific information. As was mentioned, this is born out of my academic and professional background, but also the increasing belief that traditional methods for disseminating scientific information haven't been entirely successful. So the scientific information we work with is often complex and difficult to digest, and that includes for myself as a practitioner in the field. I think notably the scientific data for a lot of the work we do has been there for some time, but behaviors haven't necessarily changed. So that brings about the question whether communication styles need to change. And there is increasing evidence that accessible creative platforms are great for educating and engaging audiences. They help break language barriers, they reach audiences from different knowledge backgrounds, and they also hit on emotions, which can be very critical in inciting change. So this interest, and then our collaborators' mutual interest in art and science brought us together for this film. Yari is at Trillium and Turnaround Films. He's been working at the intersection of film and environmental stories for some time and helped us develop this piece. So before I pass it to him, we'll do a quick rundown of the agenda. We just did our welcome and introduction. Yari will finish the introduction and take us into the showing of Reconnecting Rivers. We'll briefly speak about a toolkit we've put together to go along with this film, which is meant to act as educational support for those who might want to show this film, whether to adult or youth audiences. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A and discussion from the audience. So Yari, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Amber. Uh, this opportunity to show the film is really special. One of the great impossible tasks as a filmmaker, beyond the act of making a film, is getting it seen. It's very, very hard to gather an audience and get a film seen. A lot of really great films are made and then languish somewhere on the back end of the internet or in a closet, and no one ever sees them. So having, what are we up to now? 47 people in the audience here to see the film today is really wonderful. Thank you all for coming. My organization, Trillium Studios Film, we've been making films on a variety of subjects for about 20 years, but never environmental and climate related content until about 5 years ago. We had been working with commercial clients and nonprofits. I love working with nonprofits all around New England and the United States. But 5 years ago, right in the middle of COVID, we were approached by a funder who was interested in making or really supporting films about climate and environmental issues, which we really didn't know anything about, except for, the sort of things we learned just being normal people out in the world. So we went out and looked around and looked to see what was being done, just to see what kind of market we were entering, and saw that there were a lot of really good films being made on climate and environmental issues. They all tended to, in 2021, have a pretty hopeless and doom and gloom tone to them, which was just not something we were interested in making. It just wasn't, we're not that kind of filmmaking organization. The other thing was, of course, that there were tons and tons of videos and content on this issue. Lots of really good films and articles and any way you could interact with this subject. And a lot of it wasn't really being seen, as I mentioned before. So one of the other things we wanted to do was to create content that was useful and able to be put into the hands of people who could use it and would value it. So we created Turnaround Films, which was a series that we're producing from Trillium Studios Film. It focuses on environmental and climate issues, mostly in New England. It started that way because it was COVID and we couldn't really travel anywhere. So we sort of stayed in New England, and it sort of morphed to be mostly about New England, but to focus on problems, but mostly on the people who are trying to solve those problems, and the things that they have to do in order to try and solve those problems, sometimes successfully and sometimes sort of ongoing. So we started producing films. The very first one we did was about impervious surfaces, which we thought was going to be the easy subject, which turned out to be very complicated and got us into the world of heat islands and all sorts of ways that impervious surfaces start to get very complicated. But it was great because it allowed us to start meeting people in the New England community who are already facing this. And impervious surfaces is such a broad issue and touching so many different things. We had lots of conversations with lots of different people and organizations. So we went on to produce a number of films. We've made films about pervious surfaces, green roofs, microplastics in our water, the droughts that we're now experiencing in New England, which are climate driven, excessive use of road salt, urban heat islands, and more, including on organizations that are doing education in climate. Um, Most of these some I would say like one or two of these films we stumbled upon ourselves, the content of it. And we, became interested in a particular subject, but most of them were drawn from conversations that we had with organizations like Mass Rivers Alliance and Charles River and Mystic River and Green Roots and Chelsea, talking to them and saying, what do you need to communicate about? Like, what issues are you dealing with, and what kind of film tool, I sort of think of these as tools, can we create that can help you organizations and you people who are out there pursue your own missions? So that became Turnaround Films. This project, the Charles River Turnaround Films collaboration on dam removals, started as a conversation in the spring of 2024, where we basically sat down and said, what's interesting? Like, what are you dealing with right now? And there was a bunch of things that came up, but dam removals was in there and became a one that kind of floated to the top for a number of reasons. Maybe we can talk about those reasons after the film. It's kind of a more nitty-gritty talk about what makes a good film. Um, so we worked together for from about the spring of 2024. Production began in 2020, fall of 2024, continued into 2025, and we finished the film somewhere in the summer of 2025. And now we are showing it around. So I'll just say thank you all again for coming. It is always great to have an audience for a film, and I really appreciate you all being here to see it. So now we're going to make a technical change to switch over to showing you the film. And I apologize to anyone for the playback on here. They're going to share a link to this so you guys can watch it. Playing video back over Zoom is always a little iffy. So if you don't get a great screening of it, watch it again afterwards. Now I'm going to share. Here we go.
Rivers are essential to Wampanoag culture. Rivers are the foundation for a lot of communities. We are the people of that body of water. Our lives are intricately connected to that water. For native folks of New England, when the herring come up the river, that is the signal that our year is beginning anew. In the old times, they said that the rivers would run black with herring, that you could walk across the rivers on the backs of the fish. And that's not true anymore. Rivers are like the arteries of the earth. They're like the blood flow. If you dam a river, it's like clogging an artery. When you see a blockage, they are not how rivers are meant to be. The sediments build up, the diminished flow, the lack of ability of fish to come further up the river. When you put these walls in the water, you stop the fish from their migration. You stop them from being able to return to what is their ancient home. Wouldn't it be great to see this river, the Charles or the Quinnipiac, free, where it could flow from where the water springs out of the ground out to the sea? I know that I don't like to be obstructed when I move about the earth. And why would the river want to be obstructed as it tries to get to where it needs to go?
Thousands of dams have been built in Massachusetts over the last 400 years, each with an important purpose, like creating industrial power or preventing flooding. But these needs can change, while the dams remain.
Eagle Dam is really representative of the problems that we see with small dams all around Massachusetts. It was originally built in the 1700s as a small mill dam. Now it no longer serves any purpose.
Small dams like this can be easily forgotten, but Eagle Dam has breached or failed twice in the past and could be a significant flooding risk for the town of Rentham that owns it.
Dams create this big pool of water. If the dam were then to collapse, that water that's impounded up behind the dam can flood downstream areas. A dam like Eagle Dam is at high risk for breach in intense rainfalls that are typical with climate change.
Even if you reduce the risk of flooding, a dam still stops or slows the constant motion of a river. That pooled water heats up more quickly.
Aquatic creatures like fish and bugs need a certain amount of oxygen in the water in order to breathe, and hot water cannot hold as much oxygen in it.
Sediment the small bits of mud and plants floating in the water will also build up behind a dam. It can carry toxic materials like oil and gasoline, but also nutrients that can feed the growth of unwanted plants and harmful algal blooms.
A dam immediately stops fish from going from downstream to upstream, from upstream to downstream, which is an issue both for marine fish that come to rivers to spawn and an issue for fish that live their lives in the rivers.
Deciding how to deal with old dams is not just an environmental question. It's a human question as well.
There are about 8 houses that border the impoundment that Eagle Dam causes, and it is an asset that they use and that they have lived on for many years. So there is a very strong initial negative reaction to potentially removing that dam. Because of this, the town has backed off and shifted their priorities to choose to focus on issues with another dam. Welcome, welcome, and can everybody hear me? I know it's a noisy spot. We've got a lot of rushing water, but it's pretty exciting. Every year we have hundreds of thousands of herring who come up the river through the locks at the end of the Charles and make it all the way up here to Watertown Dam. Before colonists arrived, indigenous people used this area as the location for a fish weir. And the first dam that was built in the Charles River was at this location in 1634.
Watertown Dam was used to grow the town's early food and textile industries. When steam power and electricity arrived, its water power became outdated. But the dam has stuck around.
I grew up in Watertown, 3 blocks from the Charles River. So we'd go swimming in the Watertown pool, then walk around the dam. And we would root for the herring trying to make its way up the fish ladder.
Studies of the fish ladder in 2014 led to a closer look at the dam's impacts. Migrations of American shad were being blocked. This opened the question, should the dam be removed?
I frankly went in as a skeptic. I was concerned that they would be turning Charles River into a stream rather than a flowing river. It spawned a lot of dialogue among city officials. We talked with environmental officials, including our own Conservation Commission, to find out what would happen. A quieter river, fish and other wildlife upstream where it doesn't presently exist, water flowing constantly, unlike the water behind the dam that is warmer because it's just a fishbowl. Eventually, each city councilor came to our individual conclusions that removing the dam was in the best interest of the Charles River, of the residents of Watertown. In fact, we voted a resolution supporting the DCR's removal of the dam.
The owners of a dam get the final say in how it's managed. In this case, if the residents of Watertown want the dam removed, they need to persuade the owner, the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And for them, Watertown Dam hasn't always been a priority.
So what we did was we didn't focus on the agency. We focused on the local community.
I welcome all of you to Watertown today, celebrating the annual herring migration.
We're going to have stronger storms due to climate change. We're going to have more rain. We're going to have more water. The more buttoned up the river is, the more we're going to experience floods like we had just a few years ago.
We believe that every single being on this earth should have the right to live and thrive in their ecosystems.
We really want to enforce rights of nature and rights of herring so that we can see the fish that we've known for years thrive again.
I'm very happy to say that now the Department of Conservation and Recreation is working with us in partnership. The last meeting that we had, they presented 2 options for the future of the dam, either a partial breach or full removal.
So we are patient with our projects. They take years, even decades to proceed. It takes steadiness and advocacy to make this all happen and to keep it in the forefront.
We have a 3-hour meeting today,
As I think everyone knows, this is the last chance for verbal public comment in this process.
Those of us who live directly below the dam face a very real threat of a catastrophic dam failure.
There's beauty and aesthetic recreational enjoyment there that I think it's hard to put a price on.
I wish to repair the dam for the people, from the people. This is not going to really be an element for the fish unless all the dams prior to Natick are removed first.
I just like to make the point that change is inevitable. Whatever we decide, there's going to be change in South Natick.
My first day on the job in Natick was a Wednesday in September, and a couple of hours into my day, jumped on a meeting with a number of other town staff members talking about this dam advisory committee that I had heard absolutely nothing about prior to starting the position. So it really has been a part of my role here in Natick from day one.
Natick has been thinking about dam removal for a long time because we've known for a long time that it was not performing well on these inspection reports that we had to do.
The current dam in South Natick was completed in 1934 to provide work for the town and create a place for residents to swim. The town's enthusiastic celebration of the opening of the dam is what has led to its potential failure.
There's a really great photo of the opening of the dam from 1934 where they're all standing next to these 3-foot, 4-foot tall pine trees.
Some dams have hard concrete spillways, but also soft earthen berms. If a tree growing on a berm falls, the ripped up soil can cause the dam to fail.
To repair the dam meant that we would have to remove all of the trees, which we could not replant. When residents were presented with a design that showed us removing all of those trees, the community said, wait a second, have you even considered removing it? Early 2021, we started our advisory committee and we did a lot of community engagement. The feelings are mixed in town. We heard more people support removal, but we also do hear a lot of people say that they wish we could save the dam.
I still think that the strongest argument in favor of removal is that it's a piece of infrastructure that serves no purpose. And by removing that infrastructure, we create benefits for our community.
I first identify as a Nipmuc person, the Novaquin. It's a very significant river to myself and to my kin. The Indigenous community had actively petitioned the colonial government and voiced in public record their opposition to the dams. Who would have ever thought that I'd be speaking here a couple hundred years later about the potential removal of one of those dams? We will never give up that hope.
Another reason to remove the dam is it's cheaper. Dam repair would cost about $2.6 million is what was estimated, versus dam removal is expected to cost $1.5 million. And with dam repair, you would have the ongoing cost of maintaining a dam. So dam removal is both cheaper upfront and no cost long-term. In 2022, we made the recommendation to the select board to remove it. They followed suit and accepted the recommendation.
And there were conditions that went along with that. There were conditions about the financial feasibility of the project. And the select board was again really committed to making sure that the parks were a part of this process. And we are very lucky that it looks like we'll be at closer to a year and 4 months in terms of our total permitting timeline.
Yeah, now we're looking to hopefully remove it next summer in 2026.
Tack Factory Dam once sat on the Third Herring Brook, just a little ways south of the Charles River in southeastern Massachusetts.
The original dam, as far as we know, was built in the late 1600s. From what we understand, around the 1940s, it was no longer being used. It was not in good condition. It was starting to fall apart, literally. Certainly people who lived in the area enjoyed the pond that had been created, but there was really no incentive to do any kind of management or repairs. The first attempt to remove it failed dismally to bring people together around the subject, and so we actually had to abandon the project for about 8 years. Fast forward to 2017, and that's when we removed the dam. It's remarkably quick to take down a dam. We often said, decades of planning and fundraising and permitting, 6 weeks of removal.
As soon as a dam comes down, the river returns to its natural form. Initially, the floodplain is bare, and it may look muddy, and it may be muddy. Within the first few months, it begins to green up. Silt at the bottom of the impoundment traps all kinds of seeds. When the floodplain is restored, those seeds immediately begin to germinate. The water quality improves. Fish can breathe more easily. Trees and shrubs move in. Fish and wildlife return immediately, and within 5 or 10 years, you would never know a dam was there. We're used to thinking of dams as things that protect us. What we're learning, though, with climate change is that dams don't protect us. It's the healthy river that protects us. Healthy rivers are resilient to climate change. Removing dams helps communities adapt to climate change.
Okay, are you guys all set?
Massachusetts isn't the only place taking down dams. It's happening all over the country. The biggest removal is in California, led by indigenous activists.
I come from the Hoopanyok tribes in Northern California. The Klamath River had the third largest salmon run in the entire West Coast prior to dam input. We've been fighting with the people who put these dams in since the day they were put in. There have been people existing on this river and in these places for thousands and thousands of years, and we're saying take the dams out. We're saying that this world is better without them. There's 6 dams in the Lower Klamath Hydroelectric Project. We'll be removing 4 this year. We didn't take no for an answer, and we won't ever again.
Not all dams are bad, but there are over 3,000 dams in Massachusetts and over 100 in the Charles River Watershed alone. Groups like the Charles River Watershed Association are advocating to remove the ones we don't need, here and across the country. Removing a defunct dam isn't simple, but what you get is worth it. A restored river, migrating fish, respect for indigenous rights and people, and resiliency to the changes in our climate.
There's definitely a change in people's understanding of our ability to impact the world, and a change of our ability to impact the world. And if we have the power to form this world into what we choose, why don't we choose to make it something beautiful? Why don't we choose to make it something clean? Why don't we choose to make it something sustainable? We have the power to do that.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to switch this back over to Lisa.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, we hope. Oh, yeah, I was going to jump in for the toolkit. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. We can talk more about it in a minute. But to accompany this film, we've developed what we're calling our short film toolkit for Reconnecting Rivers. Because Yari mentioned, obviously creating the film is great, but getting it seen and getting people to actually watch and engage with it is the next step. And so as we continue circulating the film around, we've done a couple of in-person premieres, but also want to share it more broadly so that folks can use it even in our absence. And so this toolkit's really meant to support the use of the film educationally. And we tried to come up with a series of pre-screening questions to get people thinking before they see the film, some key terms, because as we briefly talked about, some of these knowledge and data points are not second nature to a lot of folks, including things like impoundment, which you saw us define in the film. So we included some of those key terms in the toolkit. Afterwards, there's a little test your knowledge and then some post-screening questions to get people continuing to think and discuss, and some additional resources. So on this screen, we have just a sample of what some of the adult questions might look like versus some of the youth and educators, because we see this film being able to be used amongst a bunch of different groups of people. So here are just a couple of examples. We have tried to incorporate questions specific to the Indigenous experience, as that is a big part of the film. And then also just getting people thinking about the waterways in their own communities and the histories of them. And then, for the youth, we tried to make it a little more fun. One of the post-screening questions is imagining you're a fish living in the river. What would you do if you came up against the dam versus saw the dam removed? And so we're really trying to get different groups thinking about dams and waterways and what we can really do for them. So that is our toolkit, and I think we will share the toolkit out and the film both in follow-up to this session. But that's kind of our package of materials.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yari and Amber. And at this point, I would love to open it up to any questions or comments from the group here. And if we're a little quiet, I've got a few of my own. All right, I think we can start out with asking both Yari and Amber what they think makes a good environmental film.
You want to start, Amber?
Sure. I guess I come at it from a broader lens, since my arts background isn't exclusively in filmmaking. In my master's program, I studied public art more broadly, including the use of murals as a tool for scientific communication. I think two of the things that maybe contribute to an effective story are the emotional aspect of it. It definitely seems like that is one of the values of the arts. As much as we can give data points, it's very hard for people to ingest what that means. And I think that includes dam removal itself. I found that a lot of people seeing dams, even in response to this film, have sometimes said, I think of dams as waterfalls and they're pretty, but then seeing it in this way, maybe it causes flooding, or seeing that the fish can't get up it and kind of hitting at that aspect of it changes their view a little bit. And then, yeah, I guess the emotional is the big one for me, and just sharing it in a more digestible, accessible manner. Visuals sometimes get across what the written cannot, and so I've seen good response to that.
So I would say my answer really applies to kind of like all video film based storytelling, which is probably the most important thing, is that it really should be a story. A lot of times we work with clients and they kind of data dump on us and expect a film to essentially accomplish the same thing as a PowerPoint presentation. And that is the death to any kind of film. As Amber was saying, film it's not really an informational medium. It is really an emotional medium. If you really need to convey information, there are lots of really great ways to do that through websites and paper and even lectures. But film is really an entertainment medium, and that's really the best place to focus it. People will generally watch almost any kind of video content if it's entertaining and emotionally engaging. So I would say that's probably the most important thing. In that way, then it's really great to show change in one of these in this kind of film. You want to see the problems that people are facing and the struggles they're doing, but also the change that occurs through that story. Someone in the audience is going to connect with that person if they're experiencing their struggles and seeing them accomplish something. Um, I'd say the only other kind of comment I have is that there's been a big push in the last 2 decades to make film content and video content shorter and shorter and shorter. It has been the kind of curse of my time period making films, is that we started out making, 25-minute films, and now every client who comes to me says, we need something that's 30 seconds because that's the only thing people will watch is about 30 seconds long. And I do think that there's a big portion of the audience out there that will only watch stuff that's on TikTok or Facebook in a doom scroll, and it needs to be 30 seconds long, and it needs to, get its point across incredibly fast. And there is some value to that kind of content. But I do also think that there is still a big part of the audience out there that is will watch much longer content as long as it's good. And that's kind of the interesting challenge, which is people, all of us watch television shows in the evening. We all have shows we love to watch that are an hour to a half an hour long, a half an hour to an hour long, and we're engaged with the content. And that is kind of where a lot of times video content on the web especially fails, is that it's not that people don't want to watch a long film, it's that the content isn't engaging enough. And that, as a filmmaker, that is my struggle every time I make a film, is to make sure that my content is engaging for my audience and entertaining for my audience. But I push back against the idea that any of this content needs to be short.
I think one thing I would add, Yari, that you reminded me of is we're trying to tell a story, but also one that I think ends in something a little bit active. And so we were conscious of trying to include sort of a motivational, this is what you can do element to the story. So people take something away from it that can kind of carry over into what comes next. And I've also seen that in other artworks. I mean, obviously we have the toolkit to prompt that as well, but in murals, for example, folks have started to include a QR code with a blurb on this is what this piece is about. Either you could vote this way or change this behavior, and this is how you could maybe impact change for a given environmental topic. So I think including something a little active and motivational, to Yari's point, not just doom and gloom, what can you do, is also helpful.
Great. We've got some good questions coming in. So Corey wants to know a little bit more about the process of filmmaking, which I think Yari can start with. So how did you start? Did you start with a storyline or interviewing people? How pointed were the questions, or were you providing guidance on what you wanted them to say, etc.?
So this film started with a spectacular document. I'm not, Amber, you can correct me to describe exactly what that is, but there is essentially a website that Charles River has that is, I'd say primarily about the Watertown Dam, but it's about rivers on the dams on the Charles River and the consequences of them and what it kind of takes to take them down. That looking at that and sort of talking through that became our first sort of like structure for what this film could be, because basically it was all the research was done, at least on the particular topics that came up in that website. From there, it was.
And I'll just interject and say we can provide that. This is a story map that CRWA has on our website, developed by our incredible former staffers, Julia Hopkins and Robert Kearns. And we will make sure that's in the content that goes out after the Dam Busters today. But continue, Yari, please.
Yep. So yeah, that is a great document, and it's a great parallel thing to have alongside the film. It does certain things differently. It covers subjects very differently. It has a very long list of fish that are affected, which I can't possibly put in the film. So it's a very valuable thing, and it was very valuable for me to get started. What really came up next was a conversation about how do we talk about each part of the step of the process of getting a dam out. So it was we need to talk about dam problems. We need to talk about how do you persuade a community that a dam should come out? How do you then get a dam out? Like, what is the actual physical process and what happens afterwards? So in this case, one of the things I mentioned earlier was that in that conversation I had with Charles River, and then we were talking about a number of subjects. One of the reasons that dam removal really floats to the top is that it's an extremely visual subject. We've also talked about making films about CSOs, combined sewer overflows, which I would love to do, but it is kind of a nightmare for filming. Dams are wonderful for filming because you have a big, almost always beautiful or interesting object that can be filmed, and the consequences of it being there are usually pretty evident. Sometimes they're a little hard to capture. But in this case, what we were doing was trying to figure out, are there a number of dams that could tell each point of that story? So we had Eagle Dam, which is an older dam that still exists, but it's in really bad condition, and it very clearly shows what could go wrong with the dam. And it has failed in the past. We have pictures of it failed. Um, and then Watertown and Natick were both in the process of being removed. Watertown being a little bit behind Natick. Um, and they were good examples of both how communities can come together to talk about this subject and address the issues. They are tougher in that there's not a lot of visual activity as a filmmaker. So both of them are basically human processes, discussion. So there's not a lot as visible. And then looking for a dam that is coming down or has come down. We went to the dam that's down here near me in Norwell, which came down about 8 years ago now, and to see, how that dam came down, but also what happened to it since it's been out for 8 years. What does that area look like now? Um, and then, in terms of just like who to put on camera is always a really interesting question. And then interviewing people. In all of these cases, we had to find the people who could talk about this process in an interesting way, and provide an interesting perspective. So John Gannon in Watertown is a city councilor. He comes at it from a very different perspective than Jillian Wilson Martin and Claire Rondelli in Natick, who work for the town as employees and are basically in, I'm going to forget their exact titles, but they're conservation agents essentially, and helping guide that from a um, somewhat more neutral position. Um, So it was working with Charles River to find those people and get them invested in the film. I always say that all films are labors of love, but documentaries even more so because the people in it aren't being paid to be there. They have to give up their own time to be part of the process, which sometimes could be substantial, and can be really inconvenient. When we filmed Hartman, it was at 5 o'clock in the morning on the Charles River, and he was very happy to get out and go for a paddle, but it was a big ask of him. And I think that's probably enough of me talking on this subject. So let's move on to something else.
No, that's
Oh, and I
really great.
I
Oh,
was
go
just
ahead,
going
Amber.
to agree with what Yari said and just say, one thing we also did because we wanted to feature the Indigenous perspective accurately is we did make sure that Hartman was able to kind of review the film as we had laid it out in our approach to it. Obviously, he's the narrator of much of the film along with Yari. So we were trying to actively include him in some of that development to make sure it was accurate in representing those perspectives. And we're grateful to him for that.
Absolutely. A great question from Anna is when we had the screenings, so we had a few in-person screenings back in January, and one in Watertown, one in Natick, that were really well attended. Did anyone talk about having their minds changed afterwards? And if so, kind of what spoke to them through the film?
I can speak to an interaction I had shortly after the film premieres. I was actually at another site working on another project, and someone who worked at that organization, it was actually from Mass Audubon, shared with me that they had always thought about dams as waterfalls, as one and the same, and just assumed that they were there for a purpose because they were still there. And definitely thought that they were playing a flood control purpose. So kind of as a default, looks pretty, could be a waterfall, probably serving some purpose, likely holding back floodwater, and that the video was able to give different perspectives on that and just help inform them on some topics that they were unaware of before. So I have definitely heard directly that they were able to take away some things from the videos themselves. That was my kind of one anecdotal. I don't know, Yari, if you want to
I have not on this particular subject heard because I'm just not in the field as much in getting the interaction. So I'm afraid in this case I don't know.
Well, the next question I think is a good one for you to start out with then, Yari. Anne says, great job on the film. It was helpful to see, but also it did gloss over some of the challenges and obstacles encountered during the dam removal process. What consideration was given to capturing more of these technical challenges?
So this is specifically about dam removal challenges. So like what comes up when a dam is coming out.
Like permitting and financing, that kind of thing is what I'm imagining she's referencing.
Okay, Anne, if you want to like list any of them out as well, so we could specifically speak, we can.
I'll
I
just
don't know
say,
if you all can hear. Are you all able to hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Hi. Fantastic job on the video. It was really beautifully done. Some of the challenges that we tend to encounter from the engineering perspective are those, those permitting and those funding challenges, but also challenges regarding not just sediment quantity, but sediment quality behind the dam. And that can, in many cases, if you have contaminated sediment, either kill a project or make it much more difficult to move forward. So I didn't know if there was any consideration given to, including a more holistic picture of those challenges in the video.
so the short answer to that question is I would have loved to, but the film could only be so long. And there's just this is actually a cut down version of it from what originally existed. We had a whole nother scene of a dam being removed that had to be cut for time. Um, so yes, I would say if we had more time, those are all really interesting. In a film context, that stuff can get tough because it's so technical and it's so it needs to be so precisely explained. So it's a really good challenge. I've seen some films out there on engineering around dam removal, and they tend to lean more into the descriptive side of things. And I'd love to see something made that explained this well in a way that people really got invested in and understood how where how like some of these dams come down and it seems like magically everything lines up once everything gets arranged, they kind of magically disappear, but most of them don't, and so I think that's its own kind. It's almost its own subject.
And I would just add, I mean, agree with Gary, obviously some time constraints. One of the benefits of the kind of little premieres that we did was that we did do Q&A panels. So Beth Lambert was on one of them, Claire sat on another, and some of the town engineering staff. And so we were able to get into some of those questions during the Q&A panel following, especially around sediment quality and contamination certainly was one that came up frequently from the audience. So didn't quite make it into the film, but certainly a topic that came up in discussion. So the Q&A and panel approach was definitely nice for that.
I'll just add one thing that we intended would turn around is that the videos should never exist in a vacuum. They need to be placed in context of a broader conversation. So it could be a panel that can talk about the technical subjects or other subjects that come up. It could be embedded in a website that also tackles all this stuff. I would say I'm very keenly aware of the limitations of this medium to cover everything it needs to cover. I mean, by medium, I mean video. So these need to be used in context of something to get the most bounce out of it, whether it's a class, whether it's a lecture, whether it's a website, whether it's a panel.
Great. We've got a few more minutes, so keep those good questions and comments coming in. We've got a few comments. Rob says he'd love to see a turnaround do a film on culverts and road stream crossings. Totally agree, Rob.
We've talked about that.
Yes, we did. David says that he loved the context of the indigenous perspective and that it can be very helpful to put the timeline of a river and a dam's life in the river within that timeline as well, which gives a big perspective of the dam as a blip of a period of time. Totally agree.
I just wanted to jump in on that because we had really excellent conversation about that at our panel in South Natick, where Kristen Wyman, who's Nipmuc person who spoke in the video, highlighted the history of the dam relative to the river, because oftentimes we hear people say that a dam is a historical landmark or essential to the town. And she spoke to the fact that it in fact was not always on the river and was not necessarily a historical landmark for her people, and in fact was a reminder of oppression in many ways. And so that was a very powerful moment in the panel when she kind of turned that idea of it being a historical landmark or cultural centerpiece on its head, because in fact for many of the indigenous communities it is quite the opposite. So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah. Robert also had the question, do you know of a good film that tells the story of herring and the benefits of restoration to commercial and recreational fishing?
I don't know one myself. Amber, have you seen anything? No. If you do, please share it.
Great. Marie has more of a technical question. To show your films publicly, is all we have to do become a subscriber?
Yeah, so Turnaround was set up. Our films are fully funded by our donors, so we give them away for free. All you need to do is go to the Turnaround Films website, become a subscriber, and that gives you the legal agreement that you can show the films in any way you'd like, except for commercially. You can't put them on television. You can't charge fees to show it. But you can show them at any event you'd like. You can show them in classrooms, and we'd love to hear when you do.
Great. We've got John commenting that they liked the attention given to those who live around the impoundment and the mention of sediment, because those often come up in public discussion and people get rather emotional about them.
Lisa, can I just make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that I've thought a lot about since finishing the film, and I think this is this is not an answer to anything. This is more of a question for myself and question really to everyone out there who's thinking about creating content in this area, is how much to address objecting points of view. So in one of the screenings that we did with Charles River, there were some people there who objected to the idea of taking out a dam. And those objections usually come, at least in the case of dams, to issues of aesthetics or history, that they feel that the dam provides something beautiful or it's historically significant, or there's some sort of environmental misunderstanding of environmental or climate health issues. And I I'm I'm I am thinking forward to my future films to wonder how much to invite those points of view into the film as way and to address them. In this particular case, I did use voices from the Natick Town meeting where people were talking about their concerns. There's a woman talking about fish and someone who talks about the park enjoyment. Um, and I think those add something to it. And I will say, when I talked to those people, because I had to get permission to use their voices in the film, they were so eager to be recognized, to have their concerns recognized, that I wonder if there's value to bringing those points of view into content like this, because it engages them in the process and it engages them in the content you're creating. Those people become suddenly, all the people I spoke to in that process suddenly became invested in the film and wanted to see the film. I don't know if the film changed their mind. I kind of doubt it, but it brought them into the conversation in a way that I felt like maybe they hadn't had before. Anyway, this is a kind of broader sort of ponder about a one-sided telling of the story versus a two-sided version of telling the story. I'm not always for two-sided, but in some cases, I think there's a value to it.
I think just a general point on bringing people into the conversation. I will say that at these screenings, I think we've seen pretty amazing event turnout. Obviously, with community events and engagement events, you never quite know what your numbers are going to be. But I think at Watertown, we had maybe even over 100 attendees. I think Natick was 40 or 50. Obviously, we've had a bunch of attendees on here. So regardless of what's getting across, it is seeming to be a great tool for engaging people in these conversations. It obviously presents them with a slightly different opportunity or inroad to these sorts of topics, and it seems like it's been effective so far. So we're excited to see where that goes.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about Yari's question around including kind of opposing voices? Only got a few minutes left here, though, so then I'll let Andrea wrap up. I think it's a tough question. And it depends on how much time you have and how much advocacy you're hoping for with the use of the film too.
So we did get one comment back saying if you can bring in opposing voices and address and acknowledge their issues, it helps with reaching people. And I think I would agree to an extent, because I do think that if that opposing voice is not featured at all, they may shut down over the video entirely if they don't see their voice represented. So I do think that helps soften the blow in some ways. You're welcoming in there, you're acknowledging their opinion, even if our video, for example, was taking a different stance. It is showing that we are still acknowledging and listening to what they're saying.
Well, thank you so much, Amber, Lisa, and Yari. This was fascinating, very interesting to hear about your process in working on this film. I want to remind you all that we have a Dam Busters webinar on June 3rd on sediment management, and I hope we'll see you all there. We will also send you the survey if we can. And if you can complete that, we'd appreciate it. It will also be included in our follow-up email that will include the survey, but also all of the items that we've talked about today, a connection to turnaround films, the toolkit for showing the film and the film itself, as well as their slides. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.